Hello, this is our presentation on feminist poetry by Amber Jones,
Bria Tatum.
Hope Smith.
Lacey Heydenberk.
Melanie Lieske.
And Michael Boro. Feminist poetry is best characterized by three central themes: exploration, liberation, and women's empowerment. While styles vary greatly within this field, the topic of women's issues and striving for equality. Feminist poetry is often thought of as being grounded in its intersectionality of marginalized individuals. For example, Diana di Prima is often thought to be a beat poem. However, she is also known as a prominent member of the feminist movement as well. Notable female poets within feminist poetry are Emily Dickinson, Maya Angelou, Diana di Prima, and Louise Bogan. Melanie, if you want to talk about the history of feminist poetry.
Okay. The feminist movement has been organized into waves, but it transcends specific guidelines. So it spans many different centuries. The first wave of feminist movement included the most important event, which is the Women's Right Convention in Seneca, New York in 1848. They drew inspiration from the French Revolution, the temperance movement, and the abolitionist movement. They had to form their own convention because they weren't allowed to speak in front of men. The men would either chastise them or kick them out. They advocated for women's education, the right to property, organizational leadership, and suffrage, along with political power. To get those rights, they believed that suffrage was the only way to secure equality and other goals. So white women were the focus of the suffrage movement. They took over the beginnings of the suffrage movement from people of color. So there were segregated suffrage associations. The Chinese Exclusion Act separated people who were Chinese or Asian, and women in foreign colonies like the Philippines and other colonies of America were often ignored and were not allowed to vote as well. In 1920 was finally the 19th Amendment was ratified, but women of color were still left out of this movement. The Equal Rights Amendment was drafted, but failed to be ratified. This is still an ongoing fight in feminist groups today. The second wave of feminist movement was in the 1960s. It was ushered in because of a period of social reform and landmark legislation. This included the Equal Pay Act, guaranteed equal pay between men and women, even though we still have issues with that today. Also, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and then the Griswold versus Connecticut in 1965, which was the right for birth control, which led the way to Roe versus Wade in 1973. This movement was concerned with the women's oppression in the household, systemic racism, and freedom and autonomy in private and public life. They questioned the role of women in a world where they have no say, and it's a time of sexual freedom instead of oppression because of the right to birth control and Roe versus Wade. The creation of many different sects of differing feminist movements were Simone de Beauvoir, Betty Friedan, and Gloria Steinem, which challenged women's roles and inspired future generations. This movement was also full of whitewashing, still separate from white issues and other issues of people of color or different sexuality. But Angela Davis and the Combahee River Collective provided various forms of representation for non-white and non-heterosexual representation. This clash between the various niche feminist groups caused a decline in the movement in the 1980s, which kind of ended that era of the feminist movement. Then in the 1990s, there was a third wave of the feminist movement, which continued the work of their predecessors, but was inclusive to women of all race, classes, and gender identities. There's two events that spurred this new wave. There was the Anita Hill testimony in 1991 and the sexist and racially charged response to her story, and the creation of what was called girl groups, feminist punk rock bands that combined punk culture and politics and feminism. The term intersectional feminism was coined in this period by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a sociologist, who talks about how various identities such as race, class, and gender overlap and influence how they're treated by society. This is a main tenet of what we would call feminism today. Some say this wave ended, some say it continued. There is no fourth wave, but the fourth wave is in the 21st century. It ushers a new type of activism that uses social media to encourage, support, and inform feminism. They're concerned with reproductive health, bodily autonomy, sexual assault, and equal pay. There's a couple significant events that happened in this time and are still happening. There's the first women elected to positions of power, Madeleine Albright, Nancy Pelosi, and Kamala Harris. The Me Too movement sparked conversations about sexual assault across the globe. And the largest single-day protest in the history of America happened in March 2017, called the Women's March. And it protested for women's rights and other social issues and was a response to growing misogyny in the political and social sphere.
So we've selected a couple poems that we would analyze. The first analysis is on the poem called Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou. The feminist author that I chose to do this poem on is Maya Angelou. She was born on April 4, 1928 in St. Louis, Missouri. Miss Angelou is a woman who has overcome multiple adverse childhood experiences and found the courage to discover her voice and run with it, despite sexual biases she has faced along the way. Her strong female representation has served as a mentor and inspiration for many women. She served as a first for women with multiple careers, such as being a writer, director, actor, and more, all as a woman of color. Miss Angelou has published many powerful poems that portray her feminist activism. The poem I have selected is titled Phenomenal Woman. This is a poem written in first person, with the speaker being a strong, phenomenal woman who stands firm in her identity as a beautiful woman, regardless of societal expectations. There isn't a specific setting for this poem, but as she compares herself to other women, I know that she is among other women. And she also mentions that she walks into a room and talks about the reactions that she gets. So this could indicate her being in public in general. The title of this poem, Phenomenal Woman, is significant because the overall point of the poem is that she is in fact a phenomenal woman. She uses repetition of the title throughout her poem to solidify her identity as a phenomenal woman. In the last line of this poem, she says, "Phenomenal woman, that's me," which follows her elaboration, providing imagery and examples of what that looks like. The title of the poem is essentially a summary of the point she is trying to make. The tone of the poem is joyous, confident, empowering, inspirational, uplifting, as well as defiant against societal expectations. Miss Angelou states, "Now you understand just why my head's not bowed," which exemplifies her confidence in that she knows her worth and refuses to bow down. She also says, "And the joy in my feet," when describing herself, which shows us the happiness that she has discovered within, regardless of the obstacles that she has encountered and overcome. A universal truth in this poem is that beauty isn't just your appearance, but it's in your confidence in the way you carry yourself. Another is the power of women and that men are attracted to it, but don't understand it. She says, "Men themselves have wondered what they see in me. They try so much, but they can't touch my inner mystery. When I try to show them, they still can't see." I think she wrote this poem to empower women and to show them that you create your own beauty and joy through your self-acceptance. I think she wants us to know that we don't need to convince men of our worth. Rather, shine on and leave them to keep wondering. She wants women to feel proud of who they are, regardless of if they are what society says is cute or pretty. Her poem addresses the conflict of the idea that women must live up to the expectations of society and to men. She encourages women to set their own expectations. A summary of the poem is that she starts off separating herself from pretty women. She says that she isn't cute or a fashion model size, but that people don't believe her and wonder how she is shining so bright, even though she doesn't fit society's definition of a beautiful woman. She describes some of her traits and then identifies herself as a phenomenal woman. She goes on to talk about how men can't resist her and that they swarm around her. She lists off more of her attributes before identifying once again as a phenomenal woman. She talks about how men are attracted to her, yet they don't understand all of the things that make her who she is. They don't understand that she's a powerful woman. She says she tries to tell them, but they just don't get it. They feel the attraction to her, and that's the extent of it. She refers to her power as a mystery and makes it clear that no one can ever take that from her. She explains why she loves herself and why she carries herself with pride and joy, that she doesn't bow down or let anyone make her feel like she's less than. She keeps her head held high regardless of what people think of her. She doesn't need to be loud. She doesn't need to try and seek attention. She's got everything she needs and it comes from within. She walks with so much pride and confidence that it's contagious to those around her. She closes by stating one last time that she knows she is the definition of a phenomenal woman. She offers strong imagery all throughout her poem to show how her internal strengths are apparent through her physical attributes. She says, "It's in the reach of my arms," providing us with a mental image of the fact that she is always reaching for more, always continuing to rise. She says, "It's in the fire in my eyes, the flash of my teeth, the swing of my waist, and the joy in my feet," giving us a visual perception of how her passion shines through her eyes, her smile, and the way she walks. She gives us imagery of how she embraces her sexual energy is confident with her body by saying, "It is in the arch of my back, the sun of my smile, the ride of my breast, the grace of my style." She also uses poetic devices such as rhyming, repetition, connotation, imagery, metaphors, and assonance, and more to connect with the reader on a deeper level. A metaphor she uses is when she referred to men as a hive of honeybees swarming around her. This gives us a better understanding of the attention she receives from men. The honey hive that she mentions is also an example of a connotation. She is the honey that lures the bees or men. She provides repetition throughout the poem, reinstating her position as a phenomenal woman. Rhymes throughout the entire poem, such as lies, sighs, hips, lips, please, knees, bees, smile, style, loud, proud, etc. Assonance examples in her poem: bees, teeth, feet, see in me, mystery. These poetic devices help me to visualize her physical being as well as connect with her emotional being. They help the flow of her words to carry me through her poem effortlessly, allowing me to feel and appreciate her fiery passion throughout.
So the poem I chose was Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. The title of the poem is Still I Rise. The author is Maya Angelou. The poem is written from a first-person point of view. The speaker of the poem is a woman. There was no clear setting in this poem. I feel like it could take place pretty much anywhere. The conflicts in this poem are straightforward. The author of the poem is talking about how hard it is for society to accept women as strong and independent. She talks about how no matter what is said of her, she's going to come out on top. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. The author's tone in this poem is very confident. She writes exactly what she wants people to know. She also uses a lot of descriptions to get her point across. She writes, just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. This particular verse exudes confidence. The title of this poem is very significant to the poem. Not only is it mentioned several times, but it also has a lot of meaning in it. It's saying that no matter what, us women will rise above those who think small of us and those who try to dim our light. This poem is about the strength of women. It's about how women are more than just their appearances, that women are resilient and can face anything that is thrown our way. It talks about how society wants to see women bow down to others and not fight back. It also mentions the way women back in the day may have dreamed of a time when they may be treated as equals to men, a time when they have just as much of a voice as the rest of the world. The theme of this poem is strength. I think the author's reason for writing this poem is to let women know that they can be strong. She wants to let the readers know that women shouldn't be afraid to be themselves. She wants them to feel empowered to do the things that they haven't always been able to do, stand up for themselves and not care what others think.
So my analyst is on Margaret Atwood. The poem that I chose was Helen of Troy Does Countertop Dancing. So Margaret Atwood is a Canadian feminist novelist from the 19th century. This poem was written in first person, and the speaker of the poem is a woman. From the reading, her setting would be in the kitchen behind a glass counter at her home. The conflict in this poem is the limitations that women have over their own success and in their life. She wants to keep being a dancer, but people disapprove of her dreams due to how society views women's jobs, careers. They are expected to live and act a certain way due to sexual bias. The significance of The title in this poem is The Author is Making Her Statement That She Does Dance on Countertops and Will Always Follow Her Dreams. Her title gives the audience a sense of empowerment and background of a stance to feminism and equality, no matter the person or gender. The summary of the poem that I chose is to show how genders are viewed as a weakness or a strength. She tells a story by not settling for the common norm of society, stating how her dreams are just as important and she can do anything and do better than the ones of doubt. She also states that society and men think she's a goddess, but she implies that she is a torch and ready to burn anyone in her way. She's not this delicate, calm, and sweet expectation that you viewed her as, but a torch who is making her mark in the world. The imagery that I see when I'm reading this poem is the war between men and women. I envision a woman who stands at a countertop and dances her way through the rebellion and the defeats of standards of women in that society. I envision someone who is very passionate and determined to make a change in our surroundings, in our world, as well as the woman to be more respected as more than just maids and birthing machines, but as an actual individual capable of having equality. The kind of imagery gives me an overall visual and organic vision of how she describes her dreams as dancing on the countertops.
The second poem that I chose to analyze was Women by Louise Bogan. The title of the poem is Women. The author of the poem is Louise Bogan. The poem is written in third person. It is not clear who the speaker of the poem is, although I'm thinking that it's a woman, considering the poem being written by a woman. The poem's setting seems to be up to interpretation in a way. I think that maybe it takes place inside a home because that's where the author is saying men think that a woman's place is. I think the biggest conflict in this poem is others making women feel like they can't do all that men can do, making them feel like they should not stand up for themselves or say anything that might upset the men. The author's tone at some points seems almost sarcastic, especially in the line, they cannot think of so many crops to a field or of clean wood cleft by an axe. The author seems rather upset by the way others basically tell women what they can or cannot do. The poem has an almost we can do what we want tone to it. The significance of this poem's title is straightforward, women. The poem is about women and what seems to be expected of them, things that men don't find women capable of. This poem talks about what was expected of women, the way men did all the hard work and heavy lifting, and women were expected to sit at home and take care of the house. It also talks about how women are expected to let people say whatever they want to them, but they aren't allowed to say anything back or defend themselves. It is filled with a lot of double standards and the roles that women and men take on. I believe the author wrote this poem to shed light on what is expected of women, the way women are viewed in our society, and how most men expect them not to stick up for themselves or make a scene. She wants to help change those views and empower women to be their own person. Empowerment is such a strong theme in this poem.
My slide is about compare and contrast beat and language poetry to feminist poetry. Compare language poetry and feminist poetry are similar because they both want to bring out the best in poem through their choice of language. Beat poetry and feminist poetry are similar because they both are based off real life experiences. Feminist poetry was also highly influenced by the beat poetry. Feminist poetry is associated with language poetry through a significant amount of women poets, magazines, and anthologies of innovative women. Contrast. Feminist poetry is all females. Language poetry and beat poetry are both genders. Feminist poetry meaning and purpose is to support feminist goals and right for women. Language poetry purpose is to help the reader bring the meaning out of their work. Beat poetry purpose is to create poetry out of real lived experiences. Language poetry meaning is to see the poem as a construction in and of language itself. Beat poetry meaning is to the beat under a piece of music and a beatific spiritually brought out through poetry.
And here is our works cited. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed our presentation on feminist poetry.